we go. So we're just coming off of a big event that we had in DC last week. We had the Ignite, the tour, which we held in DC and had a good opportunity to have many of the folks participating from the Defense Industrial Base, as well as the Department of Defense and government agencies. How many of you got an opportunity to go to Ignite? Okay, so just a few hands. We do have, what I did is I took 3 sessions that we delivered last week and compressed it into some content to share with you this morning. And if you look at, for example, the evolving market that we have in terms of looking at especially cybersecurity in alignment with the Defense Industrial Base, Microsoft has innovated alongside the DoD compliance requirements in terms of looking at delivering to you a U.S. sovereign cloud to meet requirements for data handling of controlled unclassified information. So we'll delve into that. I'd like to give you just a quick primer on the compliance that we have in terms of looking at especially the requirements for satisfying the Department of Defense regulations. This goes back to our first introduction to the U.S. government clouds, in which case we've had now for 7 years a FedRAMP moderate accreditation, now of course FedRAMP High that we've achieved in a number of our clouds. About 5 years ago, we had a major initiative internally across all of Microsoft to align on the NIST framework for cybersecurity. So the way that we're able to achieve what you see, I call the NASCAR slide of all the various different accreditations that we have, ranging from regional to industry-specific regulations and certifications and standards, et cetera, is because we do hit this high bar for a control set that we implement. And across the board, all of our product groups and teams do develop towards the NIST cybersecurity framework. And that does include, for example, if you look at our system security plan for Office 365, for Azure services, for both infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, you'll find that our system security plan is all based on NIST 853. We also, of course, implement ISO 27001 for nearly a decade. Now, if we look and dive into the various standards that we have for the government, this is where you'll find an introduction of our U.S. sovereign cloud, which I'll give you a primer on here in just a moment. That includes DISA security requirements guideline. For example, in our U.S. sovereign cloud, we do hit an IL5 level of accreditation. We now have even a level 6 that we have with our secret cloud. And of course, there's a lot of cross dependencies on things like our FIPS 140-2 encryption. We do have the largest set of requirements in terms of being able to satisfy the regional and industry-specific standards, especially if you look at international traffic arms regulation, ITAR, controlled unclassified information, export controls. So we worked with the Department of Defense and we built a new data enclave specific for the DoD. Initially, this is our IL5 environment that includes now Azure Government that's been extended beyond just the DoD to include also the Defense Industrial Base and other federal civilian cabinet level agencies that have requirements that would extend into data sovereignty. It's fully isolated both physically and virtually. It has an infrastructure that is only within the continental United States. It's managed by screened U.S. persons by contract. We actually do implement screened U.S. citizens as part of the service personnel for the U.S. sovereign cloud. And we also have all the networks and data processing all held within the continental United States. They did give us that platform now to build software as a service on top of. So with the first cloud that we introduced as part of the U.S. sovereign cloud, software as a service would be the DoD environment. So Office 365 DoD is available to those that are authorized by the DoD as IL5 environment. Now that did preclude the Defense Industrial Base from having ownership of tenants within that environment in most cases. And if you look at the federal cabinet level agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, et cetera, they also were not allowed into that enclave for the DoD. So we built a twin environment, and the twin environment is managed the same set of controls as DoD. and we refer to that as GCC High, and this is where many of you, being defense industrial-based customers, would reside. The one key takeaway is around branding. If you look at software as a service, generally we will brand software as a service as GCC High. Infrastructure as a service and platform as a service we'll refer to as Azure Government. The overlap there, though, is that they both are part of the US sovereign cloud, and certain services like enterprise mobility and security would be shared between the two. As Microsoft, we only have a contractual obligation for data sovereignty, for being able to give you assurances around ITAR and controlled unclassified information in general within the US sovereign cloud. So that's a combination of Azure Government and GCC High. Okay, commercial, we do not have any contractual obligations. Primarily, if you look at commercial, there's tens of thousands of tenants that represent everything from education customers to healthcare customers, financial services. We simply cannot identify individual tenants within commercial as being a government tenant or a DoD or DIB-aligned tenant. So it's untenable for us to be able to, for example, do the reporting requirements that we have, for example, DFAR 7012 and the C through G flow down clauses. It would be remiss if I didn't call out that it is a shared responsibility for compliance. You'll hear that repeated throughout the day here today. So in terms of looking at, for example, some of the follow-up sessions that we have would go into depth in terms of what your customer responsibility is in order to take a lot of the capabilities that we provide, Microsoft provides to you, and to configure it in such a manner that would help you to close the gap. You know, the size of the slice of pie, if you will, for customer responsibility largely will depend on the workload that you're deploying. So you can imagine for software as a service that Microsoft would close the gap in terms of looking at customer responsibility being a much shorter putt for you as opposed to infrastructure as a service, for example. So for software as a service, you know, we would manage all the physical security and host infrastructure, et cetera, and you can inherit our controls. So for Office 365, for enterprise mobility and security, you can take our system security plan, you can overlay your configuration as well as, for example, how you would document, implement access control for, you know, US persons only having access to controlled unclassified information, et cetera, that would give you a holistic solution. In terms of infrastructure as a service, naturally you'll own more than half of those controls because you would be all the way down to the OS. CMMC. So I had quite a bit more content, but I, at this point in time, do not have authorization from legal to share our exact commitment on CMMC. But let me just delve into, from a high level, a number of principles. If you look at the CMMC framework, levels 1 through 5, you know, we have for the last 7 years implement a FISMA, FedRAMP, now even FedRAMP High accreditation that has and incorporates many of the cybersecurity controls that overlay with CMMC. We also have implemented the cybersecurity framework for NIST. We've had those in place, as I mentioned, across all of our product groups now for the last 5 years, and you know, many of the disciplines that you'll see called out as part of CMMC, we align with and already have implementation of in all of our clouds. And this is virtually every customer I talk to. I mean, whenever I go back to we had the initial release of the US Sovereign Cloud back, it was called Pathfinder and then Trailblazer, not to be confused with the Pathfinder discussed later on today, but if you look at the initial release of our what's now known as GCC High environment, our very first customers went into this data enclave approach versus now looking at comparing or contrasting that to going all in. There's just quickly, I want to set a principle here that there's a difference between shared data and personal data. And whenever I say personal data, I'm not referring to like your Hotmail account, your your family photo library. I'm referring to personal data that would be that inside the context of your enterprise. So it would be your personal mailbox where you send and receive email. That would be your OneDrive for Business or your M Drive, your My Documents directory. That would be where you host meetings from, right? Your SIP account, your account that would be within Teams or within Skype for Business, et cetera. That's all personal data versus shared data, which would primarily be unstructured file storage. Now, if we look at this in a spectrum, it would go from, okay, well, I've got a data enclave approach, and this is where a lot of my customers have begun their journey of saying, today I've got all my users either deployed on premises with their personal data or in a commercial side environment or some combination of on-premises and commercial, in which case I need to set up this ITAR compliant data enclave. Now, what that often translates to is I'm going to go buy Office 365 GCC High, and I'm going to set up some SharePoint Online document libraries or teams where I'm going to instruct my employees, save your ITAR stuff there, right? Now, if you look at the other end of the spectrum, it would say, okay, well, our entire organization has exposure to controlled unclassified information, even if it's only 5% of your user population, that would have a day-to-day data handling. But now you have this whole concept of saying that you're going all in, meaning your entire user population, your company intranet, all of your personal data would all migrate into GCC High. And then, of course, somewhere there in the middle, especially if you're in the process of migrating. And why is that? And we just talked about that briefly. And this is going through agonizing discussions with many of the large defense contractors, right? It's like, the cost of GCC High is, of course, quite a bit of an uplift. We can't discount it in most cases, or in any case, if you look at commercial, it has more feature capabilities, et cetera, historically. So it's given a lot of incentive for customers to be in commercial versus GCC High. However, the exposure to data spillage into the personal data is extremely high. In fact, I've had customers say it's over 90% of their spill remediation isn't where they tell people to put the ITAR data. It's inside of their own email mailbox. It's inside of their My Documents. And you have to go find that. And the more people that you have involved with going and finding that data and doing remediation, the larger your spill is, right? So it's almost like an insurance policy to say, if I move all of my users within the US sovereign cloud, now we have our entire user population, even the ones that don't necessarily need it, within the highest level in terms of the compliance boundary. Now, you can still have people within your organization that are foreign nationals or shouldn't have access to ITAR, but at least if it gets spilled into, let's just say, a foreign national's mailbox in your tenant, the platform itself at least hits that high bar for compliance. Now I'm running out of time. I'd love to go delve into this a lot more. I'd like to say this last bullet point is not to be overlooked, and to say that if you have your entire organization within GCC High and you go through the certification process for CMMC, there's a lot of assumptions, especially the adoption of the system security plan for Microsoft, that would simplify that certification process. If you're straddling in both commercial and GCC High at the same time, now you have a lot more complexities in terms of data protection and so forth to explain how you manage those two environments.
Let's hear it for Richard.